It's 1985 and tourists converge on the shores of Waikiki without a care in the world, leaving behind all the worst things about life. And for a brief moment they enjoy the sunsets, tiki torches, and all the margaritas they can drink. But just beyond the facade of paradise is a dark shadow looming over the horizon. A little more than 2,600 miles from the island's other sinister work is being done. Over the past few years, someone has been making waves in national headlines, and the media has dubbed him the Green River Killer, due to the 5 victims found in the river just south of Seattle, Washington. Hawaii isn't immune to these kind of tragedies. It isn't all that uncommon on the islands with double-digit murder rates annually. But today we are only focused on 5 deaths between 1985 and 86. So stick with me throughout this investigation as I will reveal all my thoughts and previously unknown facts about the Honolulu Strangler on this episode of the Dead Fed Files. Jim Morrison once said, "There are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors." Consider this quote in the context of criminal forensics, more specifically homicide investigations. The task set before you now is complex. The method has been taught and utilized over centuries, and I will attempt to provide you with all the information available. It is up to you to come up with your own conclusions. The Honolulu Strangler was a highlight in an episode of Breaking Homicide. I encourage you to watch the full episode on Investigation Discovery. The show features an ex-detective and a psychologist, Dr. Chris Meandy. They were interviewed by The Hollywood Reporter, and Chris briefly describes the case.
First, and I believe only serial homicide case in Hawaii. There may have been another one, but this is kind of the first one. It was unsolved, and it affected that community significantly, and it was never solved.
Just shy of 1 year between May of 1985 and May of 1986, 5 young women will be found dead on the island of Oahu, strangled and sexually assaulted. The result is still an ongoing investigation by Honolulu Police Department, almost 35 years later. Each of their lives tragically taken and bodies desecrated. The first 2 victims, Vicky Gayle Purdy and Regina Sakamoto, were discovered on the shore of Kihei Lagoon. The 3rd victim, Denise Hughes, was found in the Honolulu stream. The 4th victim, Louise Medeiros, was discovered also in a stream by road workers. And the 5th and final victim, Linda Pesci, was located on Sand Island. The first victim, Vicky Gayle Purdy, age 25, a military spouse of Gary Purdy, an Army helicopter pilot. She had left to go clubbing in Waikiki on May 29, 1985, but failed to meet her friends. She was last seen by a taxi driver who drove her to the Shorebird Hotel at 12 a.m., apparently to retrieve her car, which was later found in the hotel parking lot. The next morning, her body was found in an embankment in Kihei Lagoon, wearing her yellow jumpsuit. Her hands were bound behind her back, and she had been raped and strangled. Her husband told the police he suspected her death to be associated with her job, working at a video rental store that also handled pornographic film, where 2 women were stabbed to death 1 year earlier. The second victim was Regina Sakamoto, age 17, of Leilua High School. She had missed her bus from Waipahu to school on January 14, 1986, and was last heard from her boyfriend at 7:15 a.m. when she called to tell him she would be late. On January 15th, her body was found at Kihei Lagoon, wearing her blue tank top and white sweatshirt, but her lower body was unclothed. Her hands bound behind her back. She had been raped and strangled. She was planning on attending Hawaii Pacific University in the fall. This second case led police to suspect the same killer as the first because of the same modus operandi. The third victim was Denise Hughes, age 21, a secretary for a telephone company who commuted by bus and was active in a Christian church. She did not show up to work on January 30th and was found dead in the Honolulu stream by 3 young fishermen on February 1st. Her decomposing body was clothed in a blue dress, wrapped in a blue tarp, and with her hands bound. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Prompted by a third body, a serial killer task force was established on February 5th. The fourth victim was Louise Medeiros, age 25. She lived in Waipahu, but had gone to Kauai to meet her extended family because of the death of her mother. Medeiros took a late-night flight back to Oahu on March 26th and told her family she would get home by bus from the airport. Her decomposing body was found on April 2nd near Waikele Stream by road workers. She was wearing her blouse, but her lower body was unclothed, and her hands were bound behind her back. Police set up sting operations using police women around Kihei Lagoon and the Honolulu International Airport. The fifth and last known victim of the Honolulu Strangler was Linda Pesci, age 36, and according to her roommate, she left home on the morning of April 29th and was expected to be home late that evening due to a pre-scheduled work meeting. The next morning, after being told that Linda had not shown up for work and that her car was parked on the side of Nimitz H1 viaduct, her roommate reported her missing. A Caucasian man, Howard Gaye, told police a psychic told him a body could be located at Sand Island, and on May 3rd, the informant took police to an exact location, only to find nothing there. Police then searched the entire island and found Pesci's body. She was nude, her hands bound behind her back. After discovering Denise Hughes, the Honolulu police established an interagency task force. This would include the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, the very unit that is the focus of the crime series Mindhunter on Netflix, and also the Green River Task Force. By 1985, the Green River Killer had not yet been caught, and there were similarities in both cases, such as discarding victims in water to possibly destroy evidence. The task force developed a profile of the killer, but 34 years later on the Breaking Homicide episode, Mary Ellen O'Toole, a profiler for the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, was consulted on the show.
Okay, so there are a couple of things that are particularly striking. The first thing is that these offenders don't wake up one morning and just start to kill and know how to access a victim and know what to say or do to the victim to get her or him to presumably get into a car. So there are practice cases before they become a serial offender. So it's not at all likely these are the only 5 victims that had contact with the offender. I also think it's interesting that the victims were found in a body of water. An offender doesn't have to know too much about forensics to understand that forensics can be destroyed if you put a body in water. I also think it's interesting that at that time there was also information that was coming out about the Green River Killer, and as you'll recall, the Green River Killer, first 5 victims were placed in the Green River up in Seattle.
So is it possible that the Honolulu Strangler was simply a copycat of the Green River Killer? There were several unsolved homicides in Hawaii in the 70s and 80s. It's not known if the Honolulu Strangler contributed to any other murders or rape prior to 1985. It's worth mentioning now that, along with the killer's profile, the Honolulu police released a sketch of the killer's vehicle. According to suspect's character portrait, investigators are looking for a man with no criminal record. He is familiar with the area where the crimes were committed and may live or work in the vicinity. There's a possibility that he's experiencing marital difficulties or girlfriend problems. Howard Gaye, the man who helped police locate the 5th victim, became the prime suspect in the case. He was arrested by police and within 10 hours was released. There was no evidence to tie him to the crimes. It was suggested that serial killers tend to insert themselves into investigations. This was the thinking behind Howard's involvement. Howard was born in Buffalo, New York on January 1st, 1943. He lived in Apple Valley, California for 15 years, possibly after the 1986 murders. In 1965, he was stationed at George Air Force Base, where he was honorably discharged. Howard was employed at Continental Telephone in Victorville as a lineman and later as a teletype repairman. In 1968, he was employed by Flying Tiger Lines at LAX and later Federal Express in Memphis, Tennessee. During the investigation, it was learned that Howard was working for Flying Tiger Lines in Oahu at the time. We know that while working for the cargo line, Howard had traveled often. So if Howard had committed other crimes, it's likely that it happened in California before relocating to Hawaii. After 1988, Flying Tiger Lines was bought out by Federal Express. This means Howard was probably in Tennessee in the late 80s or early 90s. Howard passed away in 2003, and what's interesting is that in his obituary made no mention of him being in Hawaii in 85 and 86. In 2005, Honolulu police hoped DNA testing could finally put the case to rest. Reported by KITV4 News, Honolulu, there could be a big break in the 20-year-old case of Oahu's only suspected serial killer. Police and prosecutors believe they knew the man who killed 5 women, but could never prove it. Law enforcement sources said they've received word that the man suspected in the killings in the 1980s died recently on the mainland. Police and federal authorities are trying to confirm that the suspect died and find out exactly where, sources said. Honolulu police hope that they can get access to his DNA to see if he could finally link him to the killings that gripped Oahu 20 years ago, sources told KITV4 News. Law enforcement sources tell KITV4 News they've received conflicting reports that the suspect died in California or Tennessee. They're still trying to confirm that. If he died suddenly or traumatically without a physician present, he would have been autopsied. That means police could get access to his tissue samples for DNA testing. However, if a physician was attending to the man while he died, police may be out of luck because he would have been autopsied. If he was cremated, there'd be no body to exhume. So we know Howard Gaye worked at the Honolulu airport between 1985 and 86. He drove a cream-colored van like the one police released in a sketch early in the investigation. What wasn't released to the public prior to 2017 was that each victim's hands were tied behind their backs with paracord. Working at the airport, Howard would have had access to this type of rope. Unfortunately, the Honolulu police have not released much information after Howard's death. It's still an open investigation, so I wonder if they were able to get Howard's DNA. In 1986, Howard was released, but what is concerning is that there was no mention of Howard's van. Why weren't the police able to acquire a search warrant for his van or residence? I do know that Howard's place of work was searched by investigators, but no mention of the places where actual crimes would have been committed. Almost 35 years later, is it possible that the van still exists in Hawaii and can be tested for blood or fibers? I can only speak to what is publicly known about the investigation, but is it me or do you feel like there is a lack of motivation on part of the Honolulu Police Department? Please share and comment below your thoughts. Did I miss something, or do you come to the same conclusions? Thank you for watching this episode of the Dead Fed Files. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification bell as I continue to release more cold case investigations.